Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. So a very good morning to you, and you're welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar. My name is Mark Gibson. I'm head of the Teagasc Outreach and Innovation Department. This series is brought to you by Teagasc in collaboration with Dairy Sustainability Ireland, the National Rural Network and Food Drink Ireland Skillnet. And today we're joined by Pat Murphy, who's going to help us with the questions later on. Pat is the head of the Teagasc Environment Knowledge Transfer Programme. Good morning, Pat.
Good morning.
And today we'll be discussing how we assess biodiversity management practices on intensively managed farmland. And I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Keena, who's Countryside Management Specialist with Teagasc. Good morning, Catherine.
Good morning.
So, Catherine, you're going to be talking to us today about some of the findings from your study as part of your PhD. Is that right?
Yes, and the tool that came out of that, Mark. Yeah.
Very good, very good. And Catherine, the work that you do in Teagasc, a lot of your work is working with advisors and agencies in supporting biodiversity. Maybe you could tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I suppose anything that goes on biodiversity in Ireland in the agricultural world, I try to keep up with. Because I suppose I learn a lot from outside agencies and individuals and bring it back to farmers and advisors and Teagasc. So yeah, I'm kind of a middle person.
Great. Well, it's an important role because I think a lot of the messaging I'm hearing now at the moment is that we have so much research in different areas that we need to get it out on the ground, and so roles like specialist roles like in Teagasc, that linkage between research and practice is so important to feed it both ways. So Catherine, we'll hand over to you and we will chat to you afterwards.
Thank you, Mark. And as you said, this is based on a PhD research study, and my supervisor, to whom I'm very grateful, is Jim Kinsella in UCD. So biodiversity, I suppose what got me going on this subject at this stage of my life to go and do a PhD on it. So I suppose, why should we care about biodiversity? Why do we care? A couple of reasons. The law is one, there is legislation there. Money talks, and biodiversity is increasingly in the schemes, all the agriculture and agri-environment schemes. Marketing, I think, is the one I have spent a lot of my time over the last number of years working with people who believe and understand the green image of Irish farming, both farmers and policymakers, and that is a major one. And fourthly, it's probably being maybe a scientific background. It's one I was hesitant to kind of talk about the niceness of biodiversity, but farmers keep talking to me about the well-being. We hear a lot about mental health now. Nice to have and pass on to the next generation a farm that's rich in nature. So I think I'm putting it there strongly, and especially after the last year, the increase in interest in nature with COVID and what that brought. And interestingly, only yesterday I heard on the radio of a CSO survey showing the results of it showing a high interest in nature. It's a behavioural survey, so it's all about biodiversity and nature. It's only going one way. So why worry now? And I suppose the reason the big interest now is because it is in decline, worldwide and Ireland. The International Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services has confirmed 1 million animal and plant species threatened with extinction. The Millennium Assessment confirmed changes in the past 50 years have been more than at any time in human history, answering the question that, there are always changes, and there are, but not anything like now. And again, both worldwide and also Ireland, and I just give the example of our bee species. We hear about 1/3 of our 98 Irish bee species are threatened with extinction. So there is a reason to worry now. So what can we do? And I suppose I've been working in this area for a long time and was interested in doing something. So again, with Jim Kinsella, thought through the rationale for my specific study. I was always very interested in the intensive agriculture and highlighting the biodiversity there, and it is clear there's a link there, from the research, that there is a link between the intensification of agriculture and the decline in biodiversity. Obviously, we would not have the industry we have today and the food production if we didn't have the intensification. But there is a balance, I think, and that's where we're thinking about now. And as the majority of biodiversity studies in agricultural landscapes in the past focused on natural and semi-natural habitats, there was a lot of information and awareness about that. And there was like, I'm going back over the years now, there would have been a train of thought that, leave the wildlife, go to the designated areas and to parts of the country and let us farm. But I was never happy with that. And again, there's an urgent need becoming more evident to consider biodiversity management practice in intensively managed farmland. So that was the focus of my study. And from my own experience, from years of walking on the ground on farms as an advisor in Wales and in Cavan, I felt I knew what habitats were out there and I could see the value in them. But obviously I trawled through the literature, and scientific and published literature on biodiversity was reviewed to provide a better understanding of its importance, its association with agriculture and methods of measuring. And I came up, between my experience and the literature, came up with 4 broad characteristics of biodiversity on intensively managed farmland. It's practically everywhere. So we're talking about the hedgerows, the watercourses, the field margins, and the farmed landscape structure. I'll explain all these a little later. But these make up the bulk of biodiversity and have the most potential and can live alongside intensive agriculture, in my view. I always have a vision of an intensive farm, superb in biodiversity, and it would be, there can be lots of other biodiversity. There can be woodlands. Some in dairy farms that I visited had peatland and uplands and all the other habitats, ponds, but these are the key ones because they're common and they're everywhere. So my study focused on dairy farms in Waterford, a wide spectrum of all intensities. The profile was I visited 149 dairy farmers. On average, they owned 61 cows, or 61 hectares, milked 79 cows. Only 1/3 of them had a stocking rate of over 170 kilos per hectare. So I was visiting the full spectrum. Farmer typically 49 years of age, male and married. On at least 42% of the farms, likely to be a successor carrying on dairying, and increased milk production was planned. Now, this study, the survey part of the study was carried out in 2013, which will account for the increased milk production planned there. So the typical, very, very important group of farmers, because they're going to be around for the future. And so I assessed their attitudes to biodiversity, and again, bear in mind it was 2013, and that, but some things may have changed, but some things, it will be obvious that they haven't. 97% would like to see biodiversity coexisting with dairy, which is a fantastic finding. Nobody was against it, but improving biodiversity was not a priority, in the sense that I think we all understand you have busy lives, 101 things to do. Things keep getting dropped off the list that the like to do list, as opposed to the priority list. Interestingly, back then, most farmers were satisfied with the current level of biodiversity, and only 12% believed the level of wildlife had decreased in the past 10 years. They were acutely aware of financial implications, as they believed that taking the environment into account would lower farm profits. And we have to be realistic about this, rather than pretending everything is a win-win. And tidiness was important, and again, that can be the bane of the life of anybody interested in biodiversity. The knowledge was poor, I would say. The detailed knowledge, undervaluation of common habitats. On what's strange is wonderful, and we have to be very careful about what's common might be less common now. Poor understanding of biodiversity, as in native biodiversity, as in provenance. Pheasants were mentioned by practically every farmer as an example of biodiversity, which obviously aren't a native species. Watercourses with no fish, a common comment would be there's nothing in them. And of course, I see all the little the mayflies and the little bits and pieces that were in those small streams and watercourses that also lead to bigger watercourses. Only 12% believed the level of wildlife had decreased, and I think I thought about that for a while and asked a few people, and they said, look, you can hear everything around us, again mentioning the pheasants and the foxes and the different biodiversity. And I think what it is there is no silent spring. Way back in the 1960s, Rachel Carson's book talked about a silent spring. It says what it says, and that hasn't happened. And that is explained by the gap left by the extinction of a specialist species has been filled by common species. So how many of us wonder when we go out where the corn bunting is? An inconspicuous specialized species that has become extinct, because there's other birds fill the species. So it's the specialist species. It's the same with the bees. 1/3 of the bees are gone. Do we go out and notice that? Only the very, very specialist bee people would notice that. So that was what I found, and my job then was how to improve practice, having worked on this since the very beginning of the agri-environment schemes for many, many years, and having had a lot of media coverage, writing an article in the National Farming Press for 7 years, and so people were very conscious of what I did, but we weren't getting practice change. And I suppose that's where I was coming at. What do we need to do differently? So this particular group, if we are going to engage with them, they have a high level of engagement with advisory services and discussion groups, not necessarily Teagasc, because there was a wide range of farmers, engaged with farming organisations, but few with environmental organisations. They sourced their environmental information from their traditional sources of agricultural information. That was very, very clear. And a very important one that I think we've come across in other studies before, how important family members and other farmers are, along with farmisers, as key influencers, as opposed to information sources would be the agricultural advisor, but influencers, the family members and other farmers are right up there with the advisors. So that obviously is a huge reason why we do discussion groups. 66% had been involved in agri-environment schemes, had or were. So, a group a very open group to anything that's going on, anything that's sold to them, basically. So that's kind of was my job. How do we sell this to them, to this group of farmers? So my conclusions, having thought a lot about it and discussed it, we need clear focus messages. Again, I've been speaking for many, many years. Maybe I've said too much. For example, on hedges, I've been writing and speaking about hedges for a long time, and maybe I need to be clearer. Explain the why, really, really important, rather than the rules, because the way to get to the result can be different if the farmers understand why, and if the advisors understand why we're saying something. We're halfway there. Delivered by trusted agricultural advisors. Again, for years I was defending the agricultural advisors when people said, blamed agricultural advisors for where schemes did not deliver. And again, I think I've been proved right, because we see how in the hen harrier and the reap and the pearl mussel in the Burren, where the agricultural advisors are the key people delivering those, given the right circumstances and the right, the right atmosphere and whatever. Through discussion groups, again, really important. So but also then I said, okay, they're all the clear things. I'm sure most people agree with those, but what can I do to help? I said we need a tool that is simple. All of us advisors know the back of the envelope calculations that you do standing out on the field when you're working out how many cows or how many paddocks or what grazing times, how important that is to be able to do back of the envelope calculations. we need a tool that gives clear signals, not just measuring for the sake of it. We need a tool that allows comparison, because we know comparison either with others in a group, nationally from other figures available, or comparison over time, with maybe a discussion group doing the same exercise, or any group doing the same exercise in time. Facilitates the setting of goals. So again, where are we now and where do we clearly want to be? A tool that is a measure of improvement. So if I go up on the scale, I can clearly say I have improved. And a tool that facilitates discussion in group settings, which enables, which is a very effective way of delivering practice change. So that was my task then. How do I do this? And where to start? Again, to remember to follow the principles, retain existing habitats, maintain habitats and biodiversity before we go enhancing. And enhancing is always a kind of a dangerous job. We need to be very, very careful not to do more harm than good. It's a fantastic thing to do, done right. And before we create. And what we have found is people tend to jump to the create before we go to the maintain. So I focused on the maintenance of the key habitats on farms. And again, to be clear, why native is best for biodiversity. Native Irish species are in tune with each other with timing of flowering, budding, leaf fall, etc., suiting their associated dependent species. Irish provenance, plants grown from seed from plants growing in Ireland, really important when you're planting something. Species native to Ireland grown in another country act differently, and our food chain explains that. And again, we're familiar with the invertebrate species associated with various trees, how good the willow and the oak are, and they're the ones that have been around the 10,000 years in the country, and all the associated species have been. I came across an interesting comment from a researcher, Dumont, in 2005. He warned of the danger of aesthetically pleasing or charismatic species being favoured over ugly ones. So it kind of, it is important to check ourselves that we're not doing something. We must stick to the science, we must stick to the evidence when we are talking about biodiversity. And it can be a problem because biodiversity can be seen as simple and everybody knows it, as opposed to, let's say, nutrient management or carbon. A lot of people know about biodiversity and maybe sometimes make simple mistakes. So I suppose we need to be very careful, doing something that looks nice, or if we are, that we clearly distinguish that from something that is good for biodiversity. Okay, so the Teagasc, the resultant tool we have come up with is for biodiversity management practices on intensive farmland, focuses on the 4 broad characteristics that I spoke about, and we came up with relevant questions on each one of those. The number of questions does not determine how important it is, which is why in the index that I used, the 4 areas were considered equal, because I'm not getting into the argument, and there is no research to say one habitat is more important than another. You can argue for we need all, and we need all equally. So the questions then, I came up with that. Okay, so I'm going to run through the questions then on the 4 broad areas. Ended up with 8 questions that are in the self-assessment tool. And the first one then being hedge management. And Mark is going to do a little poll on this one.
Okay, Catherine. So apologies to those who joined earlier on who didn't have a understanding of what poll was the question they were being asked. Well, maybe Catherine, you talk us through there the question that you, or the answer you think, or the different, if you could describe the different hedges for us, perhaps.
Okay, so when I'm talking to farmers, I often ask them which would they like to own, because everyone is entitled to their opinion. But when it comes to which one is best for biodiversity, I suppose we need to be a little bit more scientific about it. However, I suppose this is a very good example that there's not an easy answer. You can see that A has a fantastic canopy, superb, fruit and flowers. So it is good for biodiversity. D would be good if it was a bit taller because it is a dense space, but it is probably the worst one there as it stands. And B is on its way to A, and I suppose C is my compromise for the topped hedgerow. So my whole mission, I suppose, is to turn D into C, and we would be a huge important there while holding on to A and the likes of it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, so we have 69% of people have voted for hedge C, and 20% hedge A, 11% for hedge B, and then 1% for hedge D.
Okay, and that's fair enough. And to be fair, hedge A is pretty extreme, isn't it? We could get a better hedge, and we'll see later on. But I think it's just worth kind of thinking. And this is what we need. We need farmers and contractors to think. And then, there are lots of different answers, perhaps.
So it's fair to say we have a fairly tuned in audience today. So 69, nearly 70% of people going for hedge C. So like you say, it is a compromise. And I think we discussed this yesterday about that some people would be saying that why aren't we letting hedgerows just go natural entirely? And that I know you have some views on that.
Question 1 on hedge height. Is the height of all your internal hedges at least 1.5 meters above the ground level or above the hedge bank if present? Because I think the last picture there, D, showed clearly that while the hedge is quite tall, there's only a fringe of a little hedge on top of it. Stock-proof, farmer is happy, but no birds will nest in that hedge because they need to have cover above and beyond. The birds of prey will get them if they're up near the top. The foxes will get them if they're near the bottom. So it's so logical, but the bigger the better. But if we want to keep the hedge in as a dense space, we do need to cut the growing point. But that doesn't mean it has to be cut to the scut. You can see the height of the gate there. That's a hedge. We have lots of hedges that are 15, 16 foot high, but still the growing point is nipped. And to be honest, I personally like little and often cutting, provided we leave have the flowers in every hedge. So the topped hedge on the top now, again, the picture there isn't very tall. It should be taller, but the principle of the tree is what I'm trying to get at there. The question, number 2 question is there a flowering thorn in every hedge on your farm? Derogation looks for one every 300 meters. I would be quite happy with that if an extra one was left every year, if you know what I mean. It's a practice. We want to kind of leave a new one every year. So the topped hedge there, if it has, there, as I just said, buckets of flowers and fruit on a single thorn tree when it is allowed to mature. But equally, the escaped untopped hedges down at the bottom left here, they're obviously a flower. There's more than one flowering thorn in that hedge. There's loads of flowering thorns in that hedge. That is absolutely super, but is likely to be getting thin at the base. But is super because it will also have all the other flowers in it. And I would love on a farm to have, on every farm, that they would have some topped hedges and some escaped untopped hedges. So again, the flowers for the bees and the fruit for the birds and the small mammals. And again, really important, and again, coming back to derogation farmers, the new thorn sapling, which the derogation allows, but is very, very poorly understood by advisors and by farmers. What we mean here is to allow a thorn tree, and this picture on the top of the left has only been left it was about 4 years after I took the picture. It was in Teagasc Grange, where Francis Collier listened a number of years ago before the derogation came in, and you can see already it's on its way to being. Now it's not until it becomes mature, it won't have that huge volume, but it is on its way. And similarly in this hedge here, the thorn trees as opposed to the ash. And yeah, so really important to leave those, apart from the new thorn saplings, apart from becoming the future superb flowering thorn tree, they also provide signposts. You can see my picture on the right there. Small birds don't sit up in the top of a big oak tree. They will sit on something a meter or so above the body of the hedge. In my own study, 81% retained saplings, of farmers, but only 22%, sorry, I can see my screen there, retained the thorn. Okay, now just to my study, as I say, goes back a while, but has been taken on by a number of people, or at least the principals. So Aoife Leader is doing a PhD in Teagasc at the moment, and she's been working with us in Kilkenny Waterford with discussion groups with the advisors, and has used this with 90 farmers. So again, she had her results came up similar to mine, but 79%. Had the hedge height over 1.5 meters, 87% had mature saplings or thorn trees present. And Michael Murphy and Markey did his MAIS on 53 Meads irrigation farmers, and again came up, and I'm sorry now, well, there we are, I can see it now, in 93% and 77% equally. I suppose I'm really showing is that the procedure works when they use this in groups of farmers, and the figures are similar to what I found to Aoife's, to Michael's. Okay, so the hedges, I think we've got, that's very clear height for the birds and flowers for the bees. However, the elephant in the room is there's no point in talking about fantastic hedgerow management if there are only a few on the farm. And this is where the layout of the farming platform becomes very important. And again, the different landscapes there are typical of what we would see throughout the country. And again, there's a lot of work done on the value of the mosaic landscape, you know, going from the value of an individual hedge per area to the linear length of it with its edge effect and the soft, you know, connections with the field, going up to intersections, you know, cross T's and crossroads of hedges, up to a mosaic in the landscape. You know, the value of a hedge increases phenomenally. It way more than the area that it takes up. You know, birds, bats, bees go out, they fly along hedgerows, along corridors like that. So it's kind of obvious, but we need to keep remembering that. So the question for the farming platform is your average field size less than 5 hectares? So if you've you know, 100 hectare field, and if you have 10 fields surrounded by permanent boundaries, not wire fence, that's your average field size. And that is really important. And the average field size per farm, again, my study showed 5 hectares was the average, which is interesting. That's also the figure that if you are increasing a field more than 5 hectares, you need to get EIA approval. But what's really interesting here is the range of average field size. Now, and I am talking about average because, again, variety is the spice of life for biodiversity. So it's not that we want minimum sizes. Some big fields suit certain birds, but you know, so the average of the 149 dairy farmers that I visited, the smallest average field size was just over a hectare, and the largest was 37. So again, which is better for biodiversity? There's not much point in talking about hedgerow management when we're talking about the picture on the right. So I think that we need to be aiming for that. And again, dairy farmers are very positive towards this. They're not against it. I know it's hassle and priority and cost, but it's not going to stop them farming if they. Okay, so and Aoife's study then on the 90 farms was, again, the average field size, 77% of them were below 5 hectares. So I suppose it's the ones in red that we would be wondering, can we, by putting in a hedge, improve that figure? It would, and that can be measured over time. Then moving on to field margin management is the third characteristic, third area. So uncultivated field margins is the one question. Do you always retain at least 1.5 meters of uncultivated margins when you are cultivating? Or, as most farmers would say, if they're answering the question, you know, do they go as close as they can to the butt of the ditch? And it's really important. And I find this I often see it around me where a farm has been taken over from, you know, an elderly or a non-intensive farmer, and while the centre of the field is being improved, without thought or actually causing themselves a problem, the margin is sprayed and ploughed and probably not even utilised afterwards, and it causes more problems. So I think it's a really important message to get over to where you have, when reseeding, is not to spray, not to fertilise, not to. I look at REAP has taken this up, and it is absolutely fantastic. I am delighted with what REAP did in this. In this has highlighted grassy margins, the value of them. They're fenced, and perhaps they should be, but my questions weren't going that far at this stage. So the reason is it allows native wildflowers and grasses to grow, providing habitat for biodiversity. It's not all about the bees and the flowers. Rank grass is very good. That's where you'll find the shrews and the mice, and that's where the barn owl would come along and find and be at night. The grassy margin, I know I said one to a group of farmers lately, and they were astounded because they know how much I love hedges, and to say that a grassy margin could be almost as good, they were quite shocked. But I am passionate about that. It's the one thing that's missing. That rank grass is missing on an improved grassland farm. And again, going back to the linear feature, the fact that it's linear is much more important than leaving a field, let's say. Okay, so only 20% in my study retained an uncultivated field margin. Just again, it always comes up with the margins. We talk about the bees need flowers. That message has got out very strongly. In fact, the All Ireland Pollinator Plan has been almost too successful. I've been on the steering group from the beginning, and I just want to highlight what has been agreed. And there's a number of us talk about this a lot. The All Ireland Pollinator Plan is often asked, should I plant wildflower seed? And the Pollinator Plan says the pollinators themselves would say no. That's on the front of the Pollinator Plan. And the Farmland guidelines in the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, which I was involved with way back, and we've never ever recommended sowing wildflowers on farmland. Unsprayed field margins, it speaks for itself, but it is a common practice for all sorts of reasons. So I think we need to get very innovative about how we manage our wire fences and how we manage the area there without needing to spray. Almost half the farmers spray within the field margins. And they don't do it for fun. Again, it's like Brendan Dunford said, you listen to why they do something. People don't do things without a reason, but it's really, really bad for biodiversity. So if we can come up with ways of managing our margins at the butt of our hedges without spraying. And again, IFA in only 22% of the farmers in Kilkenny Waterford maintained uncultivated margins, and 40% of them maintained them unsprayed. And again, Michael Murphy in and Anne Markey in Meath on the derogation farmers, they are 8% and 74%. So, okay. Okay, on to the fourth and last area, the watercourse management. So again, my study found, and it's typical of other studies, that 87% of farms had watercourses. It's an interesting figure. The average length was over 1,300 metres per farm, but again, a high range there, 80 up to 8,000 metres. The farmers saw the main advantage of having watercourses is having a backup supply of water. That was after some of the frosty years where water had been a problem. Dairy farmers who had engaged in agri-environment schemes had better watercourse management practices, such as fencing and creating watercourse margins, unsurprisingly. The fenced watercourse banks, I know there's a lot, and there's a fantastic amount of good work going on water with ASSOP and LawPro, and lots of advisors are very conscious of water quality, but we must keep the biodiversity angle in there, and I suppose that's why I'm putting it in, because it's also a biodiversity issue. I've worked with Inland Fisheries Ireland over the years, and are very clear what's good from what's structurally good from a habitat point of view. So the banks there with the kingfisher, to have a fence on a bank rather than the animals walking right through streams and watercourses allows vegetation grow, protects the habitat, and reduce siltation. 85% had watercourse banks fenced. The watercourse margin, again, a separate habitat. We've talked about the grassy margin. the values of it being linear, being rough, being different from the middle of the field, potentially containing a lot of diversity of plants. The middle of the field, the minute the way we keep the ryegrass is you fertilize it and you graze it well. So the minute you pull the fertilizer and the grazing off a margin, a watercourse or a grass field margin, over time it will develop into different species, and you'll have the strong grasses, the cocksfoot, and you'll have the spiders under them, and you'll have the beetles and all sorts of biodiversity there. The difference in the watercourse margin over the field margin is that where we introduce the element of water, we again introduce another whole suite of species. I just showed the otter and the frog there, but different plants, the fact that it's by the river gives it an even more important one. And 63% of my farmers had the watercourse fenced. The third one then being a completely distinct one, because previously schemes had protected the watercourses and the margins, but animals were still allowed drink. So more farmers than you would think still access drinking water for livestock drinking. Now I know the derogation of that has changed this, and you might be surprised that it wouldn't be the main supply, but it could be an out farm, for many cattle farms or dairy farms who are not in derogation. It still can. So again, where possible, this is a really important one to prevent livestock drinking access. 36% only excluded drinking access on mine in 2013, and in EFA's then 56% there, and in Michael Murphy's up in Mead 62%. So look, it's just again, it's yeah. So okay, so how are you doing? I suppose this is I'm just finishing up now. What we want advisors on, and they are already using it on Signpost and in discussion groups. This is the tool. It'll be available on the web in a little 4-pager with the little explanations with the questions. Again, the range that I found is what I would expect we will find in any group that you deal with, your clients, your discussion group, that there will be high, low, and average. So the average hides a lot. For any group, there will be, in my group, there was 27 high, 93 average, 29 low. So what we want to know is what is the biodiversity management, as a self-assessment to ask a farmer, what is their score? The target is clearly 8 out of 8. And to me, this is the most important things on all farms before they go do other things. And how do you compare then? Again, 8 out of 8 for IFA's group, but again, ranging from 2 to 7. So, and it's just, as I said, it's a tool that advisors can use. The farmer, like the way they discuss their milk yield or grass, it can be. So the farm with the low biodiversity management practice score will have few internal hedges. It will have low hedges without flowering thorn trees, field margins cultivated and sprayed, watercourse banks unfenced with drinking points, while the one with the high biodiversity management practice score will have internal hedges over 1.5 metre with flowering trees, ideally both topped and escaped hedges, field margins uncultivated and unsprayed, watercourse banks fenced with margins, no drinking points. It's all very simple, but I suppose what I'm trying to get at is how do we get it there? And
farmers, about a minute left.
Yeah, my last slide. Farmers who felt it was important to encourage wildlife on their farms were more likely to be in the category of farm who ranked high on the index. And I suppose Babi Dayum, in a speech to the IUCN, said we will only conserve what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we will understand what we are taught. And I believe in that, and I suppose that's what I'm hoping I have done today a little bit.
Thank you, Catherine. You covered a lot there. A relatively short space of time. And huge interest in your presentation. We have over 350 people joining us this morning. So really, obviously, a very topical area. And of course, this week has been agriculture has been in the media for other reasons. We have the carbon budgets, which were announced yesterday. But I think we can't lose sight of the other aspects of the environment: water quality, biodiversity, and soil quality. And so it's I'm delighted that we're able to you're able to share your results with us today. Catherine, before we get into the questions coming through from our audience, I suppose I have a question for you in terms of the future. What can we do differently? Where would you see the main opportunities to really ramp up our performance on the biodiversity side of things over the next number of years, given the trajectory of where things are headed at the moment? For example, I know there was a big discussion about results-based schemes in the Oireachtas this week. Perhaps you could maybe touch on some of those areas.
Yeah, I suppose there's a very distinct difference between the extensive farmland where the biodiversity is in the middle of the field, and I haven't touched on that, and that's particularly where the results-based schemes are very relevant. And for the intensive farmland where the biodiversity is in the areas peripheral to farming, it's really, really simple. It's just doing it and leaving space on those farms in the right way, and being aware of the right practices, which is them 8 things, Mark.
Mm-hmm. Some comments coming through there asking a question: is there an overemphasis on hedgerows on intensive farming areas? Are there other aspects that like you've clearly demonstrated that in your presentation today, but would you agree that there maybe is I said I would put hedges equal to the watercourses and the grassy margins, which are a totally different habitat to the hedges. So yeah, but once those 8 things, once the routine, I'm into the maintenance there. If we're moving on to the creation, I mean, the world's there's no end to what you would do. Ponds, wild bird cover. I love to see that on a patch of that. There is so much there. Trees, woodland planting, corners, etc., etc. But my message is we must get the basics right first. Mm-hmm. And I thought your slides showing, the retain, maintain as your first steps is really, really important message. That just moving hedgerows around isn't really necessarily a good thing as such, or replanting and moving. Pat, we better get stuck into a lot of interest.
Yeah, a lot of questions coming in, and I suppose one important one to begin with from Kieran Kenny, and he just asks about other habitats that may be on farms, such as ponds, woodlands, and turloughs. Just to I suppose reiterate your message.
Yeah, reiterate that I'm not ignoring them, but I've spent 25 years talking about everything and have got nowhere. So I think
I don't think you've been fair on yourself there.
But we need to distinguish between, and I said there's a clear distinction there between the linear habitats. So I think this is a self-assessment tool for linear habitats. Then let's move on to all the others.
Okay, and I suppose a question there. In the years where since 2013, in your view, there's been obviously a massive increase in production and in dairy production on the farms that you've had. In your view, has it led to a loss in biodiversity, or have they managed to maintain, or have you seen an improvement in the biodiversity in those farms that you're studying? I know there hasn't been a repeat study, but you live in the area.
Well, even what Aoife did and what Michael did. So I would hope there isn't a loss, Pat. I think we've moved away from the loss. But obviously, if we're at kind of an average of 5 out of 8, we could do a lot more on the margins. I hope the hedges haven't disappeared. I'm worried about the management of the hedges again. I'm worried about those tall, love fabulous hedges being cut down, and I'm worried about the other ones not being maintained right. So that's where the loss in quality, if we don't get our management right, is the biggest concern.
Some comments coming through there just on the apparent lack of joined up thinking between the different agencies involved, the county councils and even contractors. How, and I know you have done a lot of work with agricultural contractors over the years to promote the compromise or the ideal hedgerow. Is there more we can do there?
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the confusion. It's like the confusion over the escaped hedge and the topped hedge requiring totally different management. on a farm, there are 3 types of hedges. There's hedges that marry your neighbour, and in general they are tall escaped hedges, and they're usually never touched, or else people end up in court. And but there's also then the ones I focus on are the internal ones, because they're the ones we can make most progress with. But the ones you're touching on now are the roadside hedges, and they cause me a lot of grief. But I mean, safety comes first. There's no question about that. I think we can do things a bit better than present. They're the showcase of our, as one contractor said to us last year during Hedgerow Week, they don't need to be skinned to the butt, but safety comes first. And I think, but they're possibly an unfair reflection on the hedges throughout the farm, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's what's visible from the road, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The question there: should all hedges be multi-species and include specimen trees?
Well, I mean, they are what they are. When if we're talking about newly planted ones, okay, so what we have. But I assume when we're talking about newly planted ones, again, there's for and against. The best hedge is a pure whitethorn hedge. It can still be extremely good for nesting, and if it's the trees are allowed to grow in it, you have the flowers as well. But where you add species gently, or that's if we are going for a topped hedge. Again, before we plant a hedge, are we planning it as a traditionally topped managed hedge, or if we're planning it as an escaped tree line untopped hedge? I would put all 15 native species into the hedge, including the oaks, etc. Well, wherever, So again, it sounds simple, but it's not simple. We need to be clear what we're planting. If we're planting a hedge that what we want to maintain as a hedge, take the wire away and keep the base thick, which is what a lot of farmers want. I would add species. I would only add the hedging species. I wouldn't add the smooth stem species. And again, we've clear videos on that, what we would do. But we need farmers and advisors to think about what they want.
The question there is there a role for regulation and support?
Rather than a simple rule.
Sorry. There's a question there. Do we need regulation and supports to improve the management of hedgerows?
I would put education first.
Yeah.
I mean, my farmers said to me they do what the contractor, most of them, half of them did what the contractor, they think they know best. The contractor does. They're constantly telling me they do what the farmer pays them to do. And to me, they're all doing what they think the neighbours want. So the general public and education from outside has a huge bearing on this. I mean, putting the level on the hedge, showing your skill of management, neat and tidy. I mentioned tidiness early, but that we need the media, we need the public, we need everybody to kind of switch. I wouldn't blame anyone in particular, but we need to know, because I mean, I still know, and in particularly maybe elderly relatives will talk about untidy and poor farming, and isn't that a lovely neat hedge, when I'd be trying to keep my mouth shut.
Okay, there's a few questions in there about the management of your margins around fences, and how do you propose to do that without spraying?
Well, I think REAP has it. We need margins around every field with a fence, and then you're keeping away from the hedge. You will have less problems. You'll have less fertilizer. When you look at the rank grass along the roadsides, you do not have nettles or thistles or docks, because there's no nutrients there. They've never been sprayed, or at least the ones that haven't been sprayed do not cause a problem. That's what we need in our margins in every field. It will take time. We'll need cutting in the meantime. We need maybe more work on that. But I think it's clearly margins around fields, Pat.
Just a slight follow on from that, Catherine, around water courses, fencing of water courses. Does this not destroy the diversity of riparian vegetation? Promoting coarse vegetation only is the question.
Yeah, I mean, this is where the management is important. I mean, a grassy margin, be it around a water course or on a field, is not abandoned land to turn into scrub. Scrub can be good if that's what we want. And that's what, again, a legacy from the past when we were afraid, we fenced off them in reps. And while we could have cut them, there was a fear and they weren't managed. Then grassy margins need to be cut. Ideally once every 3 years to have a variety of hedge types going through the winter. But if you leave them longer than that, we're into scrub. And if that's what you want, that's fine. But that's not a grassy margin.
We have a positive comment coming through here. Catherine, well done, Catherine. A voice of reason and knowledge in the middle of a lot of shouting and noise, particularly this week in the media. So just want to pass that on to you.
Okay, I suppose a couple of other questions in relation to other margins. There's a question there in relation to the value of traditional walls. Do they count in terms of your assessment, and what kind of value and biodiversity value can they have, and how should it be managed?
Absolutely. And I suppose where they'd be captured there in the average field size is permanent boundaries. So walls would be in there. Then as regards the management of walls, no more than banks would be the other one I would love to highlight. So we don't have those two. We could have management practices for them, because I think the value of in particular hedgerow banks, which are without vegetation, and they're not recognised in REAP, which I think is a mistake. I think we need to value those, because when you think of those strips of land, of the flora and fauna and fungi and mosses that are living on those stone walls and on those we'll say broken down banks, not my perfect hedge, but there's still a huge diversity of flora there going back 2,000 years. So that's, that is valuable. But it's not just in my questions, Pat. Yeah.
Okay. A question there in terms of any ideas for how the new agri-environmental schemes might include some of the things you're trying to incorporate or trying to get across.
Well, I think the margins, are here to stay, I hope. Really, really welcome them in REAP. The hedges, you see, I suppose a lot of the measures, reps said everything right, but it just didn't always follow through. And we have the momentum now. We have the education of everybody involved in the schemes, I think, to promote the right. Like, people don't do the wrong thing for the fun of it. They often, and this is where I feel worst, is that, if people do something thinking they're doing right, and that's what we need to change. So I would have great hope for the schemes, Pat.
Okay.
Yeah, just a few comments.
And I suppose Mark, the education beforehand is critical, and nobody should do hedge laying or coppicing or any of those delicate operations without, doing it, training and doing it properly.
Yeah, just a question in a similar theme. A lot of our small number of farmers have little regard for hedges, and e.g. removal during summer months. Fines seem to be too low, as reported in the media. What can be done to stop this as bringing all the good work of farmers and advisors? I suppose that kind of speaks to the education piece that you've been talking about, but is there more?
That's where the legislation is there, but I mean that again, and the media around what's right and what's wrong, because, and that goes with the increase in interest, I think. So it's, there is more this year than ever of that, more awareness of that.
So what I consider to be a really important question: is it possible to get experts onto a farm to help farmers identify and understand positives and negatives in individual holdings? And I suppose that's where the REAP scheme that you've talked about is beginning to have an impact.
Yeah, and I think that's where all FOSS advisors, who are getting more and more training on biodiversity and are more totally involved in these schemes. I come back to the point of who the farmer listens to. They may not listen to me, they will listen to the advisor who they trust.
Yeah. Okay, we're coming near to the end of our session here, and I just want to bring to the attention of our viewers some interesting events that are happening next week as part of Science Week is taking place from the 7th to the 14th of November. So log on to the Teagasc website, where it's very obvious on the website there around what's happening to celebrate Science Week. So the hashtag is Fest Farm Food. So do please check out some of the events that are happening up on our website there next week. And also just to bring to your attention, and Catherine, you feel free to add to this as well, there's a meeting or scientific conference happening on the 11th of November from 10 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. and very much focused on the importance of hedgerows in Ireland, including the pathogens and pests of hedgerows species. And that's been organised by the Society of Irish Plant Pathologists.
And isn't it a lovely name, Hedgecation? I'm going to steal that again.
I think it's a good one, all right. Yeah. And maybe, Catherine, you mentioned Hedgerow Week. Teagasc will be running a Hedgerow Week again in 2021 in December. Am I right?
The first week of December, the 6th to the 10th. And if there's anybody listening who wants to engage or work with us on that, I would be more than delighted. We all need to work together, I think, in particular in the field I work with, because as I said, there's a lot of good work going on, maybe outside agriculture that we can work with, and vice versa.
Yeah, great. And look, sorry to everybody who had sent a question through. We just haven't had the time today. A huge amount of interest in this topic. So, Catherine, no doubt we'll have you back again to maybe give us an update in the new year. And of course, your Hedgerow Week, we might actually get some input during that week as well. It might be a nice idea to combine some talks with that. Very good. Okay, Pat, look, thanks for helping with the questions, and thanks to our production team, Andy Boland and Yvonne Maher. And we do look forward to seeing you next week. We'll be joined by Seamus Carney, who's working with the Signpost programme, and Jonathan Heron from Teagasc Moor Park, and we'll be talking about farm-specific mitigation strategies and practical actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So obviously a really topical subject area, given the publication of the carbon budgets from the Irish government. So no doubt there's a challenge there, but I think there's lots of people up for that challenge, and I know certainly within the Teagasc team are very much determined to work in partnership with the industry to achieve those targets. So with that, Catherine, thank you again for your excellent presentation today, and your presentation will be available on the Teagasc website in the coming days. So thanks again, everybody.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.